Today is July 9th, and I'm doing an update specifically on what to do well, when things go wrong. And heavens knows there is a lot of stuff that can go wrong when you're gardening. So I'm going to start here with my tomato. Last video I said it was damaged by a virus, but what I noticed is there is a new growth here with good shaped leaves. What it tells me is that the plant is recovering on its own. It was healthy enough before and strong enough that it can recover with a little bit of extra care and feeding. It can pull off on their own. I want to transition here right now to this tomato plant that my sister gave me. If you remember last time, it was a very bushy, very sprawling tomato plant. You can see where there is a breakup. So a branch was broken here, and this big branch was broken, unfortunately. So what happened, we had a huge storm with very strong wind. Even though this spot was on the ground, it was still got overturned and it landed on that branch and broke it. But I took the branch, cleaned it up. Voila, it's growing. At least pieces of it are growing. There is another piece right here that's still struggling, but it's actually getting stronger now. It's struggling because it had tomatoes on it already. So this piece is still adjusting and still forming roots, but it will recover just like the tomatoes before. I have lovely cabbages here forming. My watermelon finally took off, and lots of peppers. So these tomatoes were hit hard by the late frost, and I thought they were dead. But as you can see, they're all loaded with tomatoes. It's a little bit easier to see here. So late frost, especially unexpected, is a very big problem for gardeners. This lavender was all but dead. Unfortunately, I was away for a few days and nobody watered it, but it recovered. You can see no new growth on it already. It's doing very well. So before we go off, I'm going to show you a few more additions. I have another cantaloupe forming here and there and there, and there's two more that are about to form on this plant. So what happened again, this cantaloupe got hit really hard because it was not watered, and the big cantaloupes had stopped growing because of it. So what they're doing is now setting. You can see the webbing. They're now set. It will not get any bigger than this. All it's doing right now is trying to ripen. In the meantime, there's lots of cantaloupes. But I also want to show you these lovely eggplants. They're beautiful. And there is another variety here. It's kind of hard to see it. There we go. It's a round variety. So nice large eggplant there. There are nice eggplants over there. And this eggplant was all but dead. I thought it could not make it, but it survived, it recovered. You can see it's full of blooms. So you can see my big boy tomatoes are beginning to ripen, turning color slowly. Here is another pepper that I thought was gonna die, but you can see it has a pepper on it and it has lots of new growth, so it's going strong. Have a nice chili pepper. It's an anchor. really nice, strong. Unfortunately only one big pepper, the rest are very small. Here's my Cherokee purple. I think these are already ripened, but what I want to show you is how much fruit it has. Now this actually has a potential for things to go wrong, and in fact a couple of days ago it almost did. If you see look carefully, right here is a break, well, almost a break. Because it was so heavy, it slipped past the support that it has and it dropped down. Luckily I saw when it happened, and I was able to catch it up, and it did not completely severed. So I still can get some really nice tomatoes out of this plant, and it's still growing. But things like that can, even though my tomatoes are all tied up and they have lots of support, things can still go wrong. Now this is my last video. I told you this was a disaster area. I was really heartbroken when I saw that these tomatoes were all but dead. As you can see, they're recovering quite well, actually. Trying to keep them alive. They're definitely struggling in some ways. There's a lot of fruit that was dropped off. When the plant doesn't get enough water, what it will do, it will drop off fruit and bloom. As you can see here, there were tomatoes here and they're now gone. Same thing here. The early tomatoes are gone now. But it still has blooms, so it's still trying to form new tomatoes. And I'm hoping to keep it that way. And you can see here, the truss is empty. They broke off, but these have survived. Now the beans got hit. You can see a lot of dead leaves that did not survive. They did not make it after being so dry. But at the same time, there is a lot of new growth. Beans are forming and still ripening. I actually already picked a whole bunch of beans from here today. But it's still a sort of self-sufficient plant. What I also did was a little bit of a risk mitigation here. I planted some more beans, and I'll show you in a moment my new location for beans. Now here is another almost disaster. This is a squash that, well, what I originally thought was actually cucumber, but what's supposed to be cucumber was squash plant. You can see tiny squashes on it. Now it got hit twice. First it was let to be too dry, so it dropped the fruit, the actual squash, but also it got hit by powdery mildew, and you can see all of the cut stalks. Where I cut the leaves that were infected, I treated it, and hopefully it will survive. You can see these leaves are nice and strong. They don't show any powdery mildew signs on them, so hopefully it will stay that way. Now, transitioning in here. This bean plant was almost dead, and so was this basil. As you can see, they recovered. If you provide enough care for the plants, most of the time they will bounce back, and they're doing quite well. Now in this bag, I showed you a couple of videos ago, my tomatoes were beginning to die. Here's another plant that's also kind of going downhill now. So I pulled those tomatoes out. I actually harvested tomatoes, but what I also did was plant new ones. And you can see where they're already beginning to come up. They're growing. So today is only beginning of July, so we still have several months. I can literally let them grow until probably end of October before I harvest them. So I'm likely to get a lot more potatoes out of this bag. There is another squash. I think that's squash. that I pulled out from another container. It was all but dead, and I transplanted it here. And you can see the new growth. So it's recovered and it's growing nicely. So I'm gonna transition to this side. Here's my hollyhock. Again, it was so dry while I was away that it dropped all of the flowers, and it just went into seed. So all of these little pods, these are seed pods. That's what happens when the plant gets too stressed out. It just goes into seed in a survival mode, and you can see the flowers had dropped. But I'm gonna harvest the seeds and plant more for next year. Here is another bed I just created. I put more cucumbers in here in this bed, and I'll explain in a moment why. So as we come here, one of the things that can happen, your cucumbers can get really hit hard by powdery mildew, and you can see how I had to harvest, just cut off all of the diseased leaves. Now the plants are thriving, and one of them is still producing really nice cucumbers. I mean, look at these. It's actually the length of my palm now. They're very nice cucumbers. But here is another variety. That's a bush pickle. You have to be very careful when you're doing these kind of things. So a while back, about 2 weeks now, I was trying to take care of these plants, and I lost my balance, and unfortunately my most productive vine got broken on the bottom. So I severed the stem. At first I thought it was complete loss. It was gonna be dead. In a little desperation and a little bit of thought, well, cucumbers, when they touch soil, they can form new roots. So what I did was take the stalk, and I put the stalk into the water. And you can see it's at roots already. So the plant is actually getting water through its roots here. But I also pinned it on the bottom here. I put a lot of soil around it, around the stalk. So there are new roots. You can actually see the roots here forming. And I pinned it with a stone without crushing the stem. So it's getting water from the cup, and it's also growing new roots, so it can sustain itself. And you can see the leaves are no longer wilted. They're nice and strong. There is some new growth right here. There is new growth forming. There is more new growth here. So the plant is recovered. I definitely had to strip it of all of the existing cucumbers, but it's forming new buds, so it's going to produce new cucumbers from these locations. So what I thought was a complete loss, it's not quite complete, but I definitely have lost a lot of cucumbers from this plant. I cut maybe 15 smaller babies, but it will recover. But this is also, between the disease and the lost crop, this is also why I planted a new batch of cucumbers, so that if I get any more damage on these plants, I will get a new set of crop in about 2 months. So here is another tomato, and again, just like the other ones, it got too dry and it dropped. You can see where it dropped the fruit. Here is probably the best view of what happens when it gets too dry. It just dropped all of the fruit and the flowers. There is nothing I could do about it. Same thing here. It all dropped, all because it did not get enough water. But it's not a total loss. So I'm still trying to save the plant. the tomato is still okay. And hopefully I will still get fruit out of it. And again, this is a different kind of hollyhocks. Lots of blooms, and again you can see how fast it went into seed production, mostly because it was too hot. So things go wrong. You try and adjust, you try and save your plants. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. These beans, I told you before, this was completely ravaged by groundhog, but they bounced back and I've been picking lots of beans out of them. So, still getting some production, but they're almost downhill now. So, which is why once these beans end, I actually have another pot of beans that I planted. It's a new addition. So here is another pot that I just put in. My sister Jenny just gave me some seeds, and I think they're beginning to pull up. So hopefully I'll have brand new beans soon, and we'll get a new set of harvest. And on that note, I'm gonna wrap up for today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.